at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Spataro also founded and is Chief Excellence Officer of her consulting firm, InspireCore, where she and her partners help leaders, teams, and organizations thrive. Sandra's research examines status and influence processes in organizations, demographic diversity, and organizational cultures. Her work has been published in various journals in management and psychology. In addition, Sandra has published a book entitled Unstuck, A Tool for Yourself, Your Team, and Your World, co-authored with Keith Yamashita of SY Partners Consulting. Prior to her work in academia, Sandra worked for several years at Oracle Corporation in California in various staff and line positions. So please join me in welcome Dr. Spataro.
Okay, well, I want to start by thanking you for including me in your luncheon today. I'm really excited to be with you and always happy to be talking about a topic that is important to me and I know is important to many of you as well. It's something that has been around for a long time and we continue to work on it and we make progress and there's always more progress to be had. So let's dive in again today. I want to talk about blurring the lines that divide us. And I want to start with, where do the lines that divide us come from? How do we get reminded of the different groups we belong to, how we're different from each other? Surely one way, sadly, is by those who discriminate, who come right out with, my group is better than your group. Another way those lines emerge is sometimes from the situation. Sometimes it comes at us. Man, there's a lot in the news that's really reminding us of ways that we are different from each other. Watch me artfully dodge all politics and current events and take you to a story from my background to talk about how the situation sometimes comes into play. As you may have noted from my bio, I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a Californian, loving living here, by the way. I moved here about 8 years ago. It's a wonderful place to live. You should also know about me that I'm a bit of a geek. There's a lot of geeky things about me. One of the geeky things about me is I like to sing in choirs. I like to choral sing. And for many years I sang in a church choir in San Francisco at Mission Dolores. My buddies in the choir there know about me that one of my favorite choral sounds is same-sex groups, right? All women or all men. There's just something special about the sound when it's all in that sort of same octave or tone. And we had a group coming to San Francisco called the Flirtations, an all-men's a cappella group. Do any of you remember the movie Philadelphia with Tom Hanks? That scene at the end, at the wake, when the Flirtations sang Sandman, it's that group. For those of you who are making the connection. Yeah, my claim to fame, I saw them. So we went to the concert one Sunday afternoon, after church. We're sitting through the performance, which is joyful and ebullient and beautifully musical, tremendously gay, right? Very, very out and open with all of that. We're having a wonderful time together. It's a great time. They come to a place in the program where they're going to teach the crowd, the audience, the Flirtations fling, which is some big flamboyant movement. And the joke that they make is, now any of you straight people in the audience, you might need a spotter, so we want to help you out. And they say, okay, straight people, raise your hands. And so I raise my hand. Holy Toledo. It's like me and some guy 4 rows away in the balcony, and maybe like in that moment, in that situation, what wasn't even in my mind came pouring down on me. I'm used to being a member of a majority, right? I walk through the world as a straight woman, which is like most other people. And then here I was, a mere token, amidst a whole bunch of people that were different. Now, lucky for me, it was a loving, fun, safe room to be in. But you all know of situations where the lines that divide us come up in ways that are much less joyful, can even be threatening, can be very difficult. So there's those who discriminate openly. There's the situation that brings the lines that divide us to a mind. I'm going to assert to you today that another possibility is us. And I'm going to go way out on a limb here and assume that we are of like mind in feeling strongly committed to embracing diversity and finding equal opportunities for people and leveling the playing field. And yet we, as members of the whole population, can be vulnerable to some biases that actually are contributing to the problem instead of taking it where we want it to go. On that happy note, I'm going to dive into the content of what we're talking about today. Let's just get a quick read of the landscape. It ain't pretty. You've seen these kind of numbers before. 5 out of all Fortune 500 companies have African American CEOs. 5. One hand. Count them. You are 14% less likely to get a call back after submitting your resume if your name sounds African American. Sounds African American. Than those with white-sounding names. Men are 30% more likely than women to be promoted from entry level up to manager. You know many other stats, sadly, like this, that are consistent with this. Here's one of my favorites. There are fewer Fortune 500 CEOs that are women than whose names are David or John. Each of those names individually. Two names, not just one male name, but 2 names, outnumber all of the female. Yowza, right? This is true despite the fact that diversity is good for business. We've longed for these studies for decades, and they're finally here. Good science, reliable science. Ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to outperform national industry medians. Gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to outperform industry standards. Companies reporting the highest levels of racial diversity in their organizations bring in nearly 15 times more sales revenue than those with lower diversity. There's an obvious social opportunity here. There's a compelling justice opportunity here. There's also a bottom line opportunity here that we're not making the most of the opportunity. So let's start at the beginning. What is diversity? Lots of different definitions. We think about it in our heads in different ways. Let me start by posing to you. Is this a diverse group? This is the Tetzlaff Vogt, I practice saying that, trio. One of the premier chamber ensembles in the world, violin, piano, and cello. What are the lines that might divide this group? Okay, gender.
Possibly age.
Maybe age.
Economic upbringing.
Maybe economic upbringing, social status.
Tons of things you can't see.
Tons of things you can't see, but might matter if we knew them. There was something else. Nationality, good. Language of origin. Instrument. Having a disability, thank you, on National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Did I get it? There's a flyer on your table. There might be physical disabilities amongst this group we're not aware of. Maybe mental disabilities amongst this group. What I love about how you're responding to my question is you are thinking broadly. There are a few characteristics of diversity that have huge social justice ramifications and are so important. How can we look past race? How can we look past gender? How can we look past age, right? Sexual orientation, and yet, the processes that I want to talk about today, where I want to focus your attention, apply to any difference that's made salient. Any way in which I see myself as different from you, the us and them kicks in. And it shows up across many, many different characteristics. This is a familiar chart to any of you who look at identity issues. And there's sort of 4 levels here. There's primary identities, age, gender, ethnicity, race. There's what they call secondary, your education, religion, language of origin. And we step out further to the organization. What's your union affiliation? What's your tenure where you work? How long have you been there? Right? What managerial rank do you hold? And then one step out further, we think about our culture. And cultures vary on a number of important dimensions. Our relationship with time. You ever taken an Italian train? Don't set your watch by it, right? Space. How much personal space we want or desire. Think about how the Midwest is different from the Northeast or from California. Right? When I first came here, I was different. I've hopefully adopted some of your smart ways. It's a lovely place to live again. I actually want to ask you to dig in at this point. I'm a teacher, so there has to be a worksheet. On your table, face down, are a couple of worksheets. If you could each take one, I'd like you to think about your identities, your identity experience, because it shapes how you move through the world. And I want to set that as a foundation for talking about the rest of what we're going to get into today. So my ask is that you will pick 3 of the identities listed. Or if there are others that are salient to you, pick those. But 3 ways that you characterize yourself, that you carry from situation to situation. How do those affect how you move through the world? How does that, what are the implications of that for who's different from you? Who do you see as different? And I'm going to ask you to share with a partner. While you're thinking, I'm going to vamp a little with an example about me. I'm a woman. I'm an academic. There's stuff around all of those, right? I am from Mediterranean heritage, we'll do it that way. My dad's parents came from Sicily. My mom's parents came from Armenia. We're very loud, but the food is delicious, right? So I carry that stuff around with me. It often feels top of mind, situations that I'm in. I notice how women are being treated, people who don't respect women, and that's some women and some men. My dad is one of the great feminists I know. He's an 86-year-old retired electrical engineer. But he raised 2 daughters who have made choices for themselves and are contributing members to society, at least a little, right? Are carrying things forward. So for me, it's not a men versus women thing. It's, do you respect women? Immigrants are different from me. I was born here. I'm a second-generation American. There's so much to learn from people who've lived outside the United States. What they bring from their culture, that's been made dear to me in my upbringing, because we're not too far away from being immigrants. Like I said, Midwesterners were different from me when I moved here. So would you please just take 2 minutes and talk about what you have written down, talk about your notes, talk about your thoughts with someone at your table. 2s or 3s. And I want to ask you for some insights. It puts us in mind of who we are and who we are not. And that distinction creates this notion of otherness, people who are different from us, the quality or fact of being different. What's significant about that, and many of you found similarities or differences in your sharing on characteristics that are not the sort of big 3 or big 5, lots of different dimensions of diversity. My own research on the topic, I studied 3 different organizations in 3 different industries, and they had very different values around different characteristics. In one of them, whether you had lived outside the United States was a big deal, and people really valued that because of the kind of work they did, because of what they were interested in. In another, how politically or religiously conservative, how many kind of emblems did you have on your desk, or how outwardly did you show your Christianity, it was in this case. In another, it was about education, right? It was the opposite of what you might expect. They were engineers coming into a phone company technical service department, and the legacy techs were not happy with the engineers, and so having more education actually hurt your status in the situation, but they were bases of differentiation. They created otherness. So I want to expand, for this moment at least, our conception of diversity to be as broad as anything by which we differentiate ourselves. Because when that happens, the engines start going. Biases come our way. And I want to talk through 3 of them specifically today. But I want to start first with who holds these biases. There's ugly stuff out there, like I said. Some are all too ready to foist their ugly discrimination on us. Right? That's all the time they get today. The truth is, every single one of us is vulnerable to the cognitive biases that occur once we've differentiated, once there's otherness. I was recently back in Connecticut with my consulting partners. It's fun to have that work along with being an academic, right? How lucky am I to have that? But we're looking to hire someone. We're a teeny firm, small, 6, 7 people, looking to add 1 more person. We're all women, which, yay, women-owned business, but we need some diversity, right? So we're looking for someone to join us as our chief of staff, and we've got a list of finalists, and one of them is a man. And my partner, who could not be more committed to diversity, could not be more, make it a higher priority, right? Really progressively minded in this regard. Was talking about this talk, and her background, she was processing, and she said, you know what? I caught myself thinking about Lewis as a finalist for this job, and I saw myself adding lines to our hiring rubric. Maybe we should consider, would the person be fun to go have lunch with? And I don't know, a guy with all women, it might not work out so well. Or maybe we should consider, would the person have fun with us? Because that's important too. And then I thought, she said, we're only 7 people. Do we have to start thinking about diversity now? She caught herself pushing it back. Maybe we could start at 10, right? Not at 7. This person who could not be more committed to the good stuff we all want caught herself in the moment falling prey to some biases that were going to skew her evaluation of this candidate. None of us is immune. Every one of us needs to be aware of these. That's what we're doing here today. 3 biases I want to talk about today that are quite universal. I think you've heard of all of them. We'll just dig into each briefly. Implicit bias, which is about automatic associations between attitudes or beliefs like good or bad, and demographic categories like man or woman or white or black. And you have these automatic associations which you're not even aware of. They come to the surface. Racial anxiety, which I'm going to claim to you, and there's science behind it, is really about any difference, but has been dubbed racial anxiety. And that's the discomfort, the fear we feel when approaching an interaction with a different other person, that we're going to come across looking biased, we're going to say something clumsy that makes us look racist, right? You know that fear of, did I say the right thing? Did I say the wrong thing? That's racial anxiety. And stereotype threat. We actually, in fearing that we might fulfill negative stereotypes about us, end up doing exactly that. It's the worry that we will conform to negative stereotypes about us that ends up hurting our performance. So I want to dig into each one of these a little bit. We're getting heavy, I know. Stay with me. There's what to do about them on the other side. First is implicit bias. The attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Not at all aware of it. I have a short video for you, a quick YouTube rundown on implicit bias so you don't have to be listening to my voice the whole time. As you're watching this, please think about any insights, any examples. I'd like to hear what you think about it on the other side.
In Lesson 1, we learned that schemas apply to people. Without any conscious thought, the instant we see someone, we assign them to salient and chronically accessible social categories, such as age, gender, race, or profession. Once we tag someone as belonging to a particular group, our brain automatically activates a cloud of information that we've come to associate with that group. These associations then potentially influence how we think about and interact with that person. This cloud of associations includes what social psychologists call attitudes and stereotypes. An attitude is an association between a category and an evaluative valence, either positive or negative. Attitudes are like gut feelings, a general like versus dislike, hot versus cold, thumbs up or thumbs down. We hold attitudes about all sorts of things. For instance, you might have a negative attitude toward large rats, but a positive attitude toward plump hamsters. A stereotype, in contrast, is a more specific association between a category and a particular trait. When you think of the category snakes, you probably think of the trait venomous. We know that not all snakes inject toxins when they bite, but there's a strong association nevertheless. Stereotypes also apply to people. Some groups are considered athletic, whereas others are assumed to be good at math. Some groups are seen as natural leaders, whereas others are seen as natural caregivers. Take me, for example. When you see my face or read my last name, your brain hashtags me as Asian, and the attitudes and stereotypes you associate with that category are automatically activated. If you have a positive attitude toward Asians, you might smile at me just a little bit more when I approach you at a lunch table. If you think Asians are good at math, you might be a little more inclined to hire me as your accountant, but not your lawyer. If you think Asians aren't athletic, you probably won't choose me for your pickup game of basketball. We call attitudes and stereotypes biases because they represent information that diverges from some neutral point. Explicit biases are attitudes and stereotypes that you know you have because you can just ask yourself what your feelings and thoughts are and get an answer. By contrast, an implicit bias is an attitude or stereotype that you have no direct introspective access to. In other words, asking yourself for an honest answer doesn't tell you what you need to know. Where do these biases come from? Why do we associate certain attitudes and stereotypes with some groups but not others? Well, think about how you learned that snakes are venomous. Or think about why certain smells or foods give you a warm feeling of home. It's through exposure in a particular context. Sometimes that exposure is through direct contact. Other times it's through secondhand or vicarious contact, mediated through stories, books, movies, social media, and popular culture. It's no different with people. Pause for a moment and think about your attitude toward Native Americans. Also, what traits do you associate with them? How did you learn all this? Was it through direct interaction? If it was more vicarious, how accurate and representative do you think those exposures were? Because we are aware of explicit bias, we're often mindful about checking them for accuracy, appropriateness, and fairness. Most of us actually strive to revise our prior attitudes and stereotypes on the basis of better information. But this sort of self-correction doesn't go on with implicit bias because we don't even know we have them. Unfortunately, there's increasing evidence that implicit biases, even though they operate invisibly, influence our actions and decisions in small but consequential ways.
We hear implicit bias come up a lot when we're talking about police, the way they deal with people the way white cops deal with black citizens. Where else does it come up? What insights do you have? Oh, yes.
I think it comes up every day, especially for those who interview people, because we tend to gravitate to the people that identify with the
Liking is a powerful attractor.
We identify for a specific position. You have in your head exactly what you think that person should look like for that position.
Yes. One of the de-biasing strategies I'm going to show you later is evaluate people based on objective performance rather than presence. There's so much room for subjectivity in presence, right? But if we can be more objective. Yes, good. Thank you. What we know about implicit bias, again, unconscious. The best intentions, the strongest commitment lose out because this is underneath our consciousness. It is pervasive. We are all vulnerable to it. We all have implicit biases. Are they all discriminatory against minority groups? I'm sure not. We all have these automatic associations. They're part of how our brain works efficiently. They're shortcuts. They're sometimes contrary to our explicit beliefs. Not just not consistent with, but actually conflicting directly with them, right? My partner that I told you about hiring a man, honest to goodness, I believe true in her heart is her commitment to diversity. And even she found herself saying, maybe we don't have to start being diverse just now, or maybe it's not the right person, you know? You're sneaking in. Have real world effects on behavior. The good news is, are malleable. We can unlearn any implicit biases we have that we don't want to hold. The key is awareness. And I'll give you a hint to where you can learn about your own in some easy ways. First, I want to tell you a story of Howard and Heidi Roizen. Heidi Roizen is a very successful Silicon Valley venture capitalist. She is the connector, known for her network. Brings people together at dinner parties for deals that no one could ever dream of. She's so significant in this regard. There's a Harvard business case written about her, and a lot of MBA professors like me teach that case to show MBA students how critical their network can be in their success. And so they read this case about Heidi, these famed dinner parties, always being available, taking a business meeting in her kid's bathroom while she's bathing her 2 young daughters, right? Really there to get the work done. Some colleagues of mine, Franklin and Dan Ames, were teaching this case and felt like there was some negative pushback against Heidi and they wanted to explore it. So they reproduced the case verbatim, but changed Heidi to Howard. She was a high school cheerleader, they changed that to high school football player. It's the only other change. So now he's always on his cell phone. He's throwing great dinner parties. He's bathing the kids during a business meeting. Okay? Exactly the same. What do you think happened? They started asking some questions about good qualities of these two characters. To what extent do you think they're kind, genuine? Howard, much higher than Heidi. Wildly statistically significant for those of you who are tracking in the room. And they asked, well, what about some negative traits? What about being power hungry? What about being disingenuous? Well, we're pretty clear that Heidi is higher on those, absolutely, right, than this group. One section read Heidi, one section read Howard. Then they asked about effectiveness. They asked about competency. What do you think happened there? The differences go away, and they're not different from each other statistically. So both groups recognize Heidi is equally competent to Howard. They just don't like her. Wouldn't hire her, don't want to work with her. I know, cheery, huh? Sorry, this is truth. They learned that what was driving that discrimination was a sense that Heidi was too agentic, too instrumental, too, there's always a reason for what she's doing. It's never just kindness, it's never just friendliness. And that's not okay in Heidi. So then they asked, well, they didn't, Heidi did. When my colleague first called Heidi and told her this lovely news, what do you think her first question was? Did you cut the ratings by sex? Who do you think it's coming from, the men or the women?
Women.
86 of the 90 MBA students said it was the women. Heidi said, it's the women.
Oh.
It was the men. So just take a moment and think about how messed up that is, right? A woman is being discriminated against by men, but women are blaming themselves for, right? Now, some of that bias from these men is implicit. I don't believe that they're all going to say to you, women are bad. They recognize Heidi's competence, right? But there's something in their gut that just doesn't feel right. That's an implicit bias. That's that automatic association that sneaks up on you. Heidi wouldn't do so well in the work world, given the traits that are portrayed in that case. So what do you do about implicit bias? You're most vulnerable to it when you're under stress, with time constraints, multitasking, and need for closure. Why these times? You're distracted. Your cognitive energy is on other things, and you don't have time to really be examining how you're thinking. Mindfulness is actually a nice antidote to implicit bias. But more active strategies you can do is focus on challenging the stereotypes in the first place. Challenge your associations. A man joining our consulting team at InspireCorps, really, would that be bad? I mean, let's think about it. That might be very nice, actually. That might be a lovely addition. Challenge it. Intergroup contact, right? Getting to know each other, getting to know the truth. Putting behavior in measurable terms. Measurable, so we leave less room for the subjective. Accountability, right? Hold people responsible for what they're promising you. Perspective taking. We'd said to those MBA students, imagine you're Heidi. How would you feel? Would you want to work with the rest of us? How would it go, right? And again, mindfulness. So what are the implicit biases you may be carrying around? It is a research project. They are collecting data, but they've been doing this for decades. How many of you know of Project Implicit? Yeah, a couple, good. Really easy to find. Google Project Implicit or implicit.harvard.edu. Researchers, it's housed at Harvard now. And you go on the site, they collect minimal demographic data from you. You don't get tons of emails from them. And you actually do some timed tests of associations. They look at how quickly you hit the keys for good or bad associated with this or that, and they crisscross them, and it's interesting to do. And you can pick from a number of different possible biases, from racial to political to social to disability-based to anything that you're interested in. I encourage you to check it out, right? When you need a 10-minute refocusing break, there's a place to go pretty easily on the internet. These are malleable. Awareness is the antidote. Okay, that's implicit bias. Let's move on to racial anxiety. Racial anxiety is the discomfort people feel in anticipation and during interactions with a different other. My friend was facilitating a discussion about diversity in an executive class a couple weekends ago. And they were getting into a really good discussion, right? Some heartfelt stuff being exchanged. Pretty racially diverse group. And one of the women, a white woman, raised her hand and said very proudly, "I'm colorblind." And an African American woman in the room said, "I know you mean that to be a good thing, but it hurts me." This African American woman said, "I'm proud of my color. I wear bright nail polish to further announce my presence in a room. I wear braids in my hair because the slaves wore braids in their hair as maps to show each other where it was safe." How did this white woman feel when she had offered what she thought was the most openness to diversity that she could and was told the exact opposite? Well, she felt awful, of course. And we kind of fear that. Oh, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to do the wrong thing. I'm going to come across as prejudiced when I'm not. When I'm not. Here's a silly example. I was driving the other day, and a truck pulled out of a gas station, like right into the stream of traffic. I'm like, hello, like I'm right here, Totally unsafe. So I'm looking up at the truck driver like, "You dummy, that is unsafe." Of course, only saying it to myself. I wouldn't dare say it out to anybody else. he's black. So then I say to myself, uh-oh, wait, I can't do that. I can't call him a dummy because of, but no, it was unsafe. But I'm having this whole fight in my head about whether I'm allowed to call the unsafe driver a name because he's a different race from me. That anxiety gets in our way. Short video on racial anxiety. Again, I'd like to hear your insights.
You know, most Americans are really very fair-minded, egalitarian people. We believe in equality for all races, all genders. The challenge is that while our conscious selves are egalitarian, we still hold these unconscious or somewhat implicit biases that have been primed in us over many years, largely through media and culture. One of those stereotypes is we equate black men with fear. When race drops into a conversation, our executive brains shut down on both sides. So if you are a white American who is, a very fair-minded person, when race is presented to you, your brain will start to wonder, is what I'm about to say next going to be perceived by the other person as racist or biased? And if you are of color, your brain likewise shuts down, right? It says, okay, is something about to come at me that might be an opportunity to invalidate my life experience? Both of your brains are going into fight or flight mode. It's just not a recipe for a meaningful, honest dialogue around something that's so critical and so important. Some of the work that we've been doing with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement is really trying to disarm people's anxiety around dealing with race and black men and boys. If you are conscious of the fact that you are stereotyping someone, conscious of the fact that you are treating someone differently, when you're confronted in that situation, you will self-correct. That can affect us whether we're talking about our daily informal interactions or whether we are talking about improving the jury instructions or improving the ways teachers or police officers or doctors actually interact with patients who happen to be black men.
What do you think of what she had to say? It's hard stuff to talk about. Do you recognize that feeling I'm describing and she's describing? We felt it. Might be about race, might be about something else, might be about some of those traits that we can't see, but we're suspect. When we get in that fight or flight mode, when our executive brain shuts down, it shows up behaviorally in ways that distance us from the other person. We smile at them less, we make less eye contact, we're less friendly in our tone, greater physical distance. We might just avoid them altogether. Now keep in mind the causes for this. One cause for this is feeling biased about the person and having your biases show. But another cause is not being biased, but being afraid you'll come across that way. Right? Again, those of us who are committed to this all being better can fall prey. The contact hypothesis from Gordon Allport, who was writing in the 1950s, but boy is it still relevant today, says that the way to reduce this anxiety, the way to build comfort, is to be in contact with each other. He started this research on what were called jigsaw classrooms. Is that a familiar term to any of you? Students in elementary school put into diverse classrooms, sort of busing the classroom, if you will, and watching how the children affiliate with each other over time and through contact. And they found that, unsurprisingly, with more contact, anxiety goes down. Friendships emerge. Affinity. They find similarities, so otherness goes down. There's even empathy and understanding that come with contact. So this one, my friends, there's no shortcut on this one. I can't send you to somewhere on your PC alone in your office to work on it. This one is about being brave. We have to be brave to have the difficult conversation, to approach the person we might be worried about, to be transparent about it. It might sound awkward right now. Forgive me if I'm clumsy. Here's what I'm talking about. Here's what I'm doing. Find that room for common space. But as leaders in human resources, you have the responsibility as well to engineer that interaction among others. You have the opportunity at least. To get people who are from different groups working together, listening to each other, finding out more about themselves by being with each other. That is easy to say and really hard to do. I'm with you. But it is our opportunity. Nothing is going to take the place of our courage. The antidote to anxiety is contact. You have to step into what you fear. Look for some opportunities to do that. Okay. Racial anxiety, other anxiety. Let's talk about the last of the three. Stereotype threat. This is when you are, or you feel, you worry about confirming negative stereotypes about your group. I'm a woman, everybody knows women can't drive, I get on the road, I feel anxious, they're going to think that I can't drive because I'm a woman, and I get it, and I make driving mistakes. It's been tested in a lot of domains, many much more serious than driving. Could we play the short video again? That'll show you how powerful this is in shaping behavior.
Are men better than women at science? Are certain races smarter? Those are the stereotypes, but now some psychologists say stereotypes can become self-fulfilling prophecies.
What's the ratio here of cute guys to, like, me?
Ever see this ad depicting a ditzy woman trying to get into college?
What are your plans for the future?
Like, when are the homecoming queen elections?
One study showed that women who watched ads like this before taking a math test scored 38% lower than women who didn't see the ad. The Kaplan Education and Test Prep Company helped us run similar tests. And sure enough, in our unscientific test, the women who saw the sexist commercials did worse. Some later told us they found those results hard to believe. It's so powerful that just watching the dumb ad could make a difference?
No. I don't think so.
The women in your group did worse.
The only way for it to work is that you have to internalize it. I guess you don't know what's really affecting you, which is creepy in and of itself.
This stereotype effect has been found in study after study, says NYU psychology professor Joshua Aronson.
We found that just reminding the women that they were college students at a selective college overcame the gender gap. However, when we remind them that they're women, the gap widens.
You tell Asians that, remember, Asians do well in math?
Yes.
Their scores go up?
Yes.
Then what does the stereotype that blacks test poorly do to a black person who's about to take a test?
The situation of taking an IQ test for a black kid is so loaded that it's not a direct measure of their intelligence.
He found he could change blacks' test scores simply by saying different things before the test.
Tell people taking that test that this isn't a test at all, it's a puzzle. The black students' scores jump dramatically. Mindset matters.
That was also found in golf experiments, as demonstrated here, done by Jeff Stone at the University of Arizona.
The test is designed to measure personal factors correlated with natural athletic ability.
First, black and white students are told a miniature golf game tests athletic ability.
Natural athletic ability. Natural athletic ability.
After hearing that, blacks perform better. Blacks, after all, have heard plenty about blacks being natural athletes.
I'm confident in my ability, so when I heard it was a test of that, I was like, okay, well, I know I'm going to score somewhere in the high range to see how high I can go with this.
Oh! But when students were told the golf game is a test of intelligence,
The test is designed to measure personal factors correlated with sports intelligence.
his study found the black scores were 18% worse.
Oh, come on.
Some of this research showing that stereotypes can become self-fulfilling prophecies.
You see the research. The stereotype threat effect, you can play up to a stereotype or down to a stereotype. So telling an African American person undertaking an athletic endeavor, as athletic as you think golf is, that it's an intellectual task is enough to dump their score. Again, right? These are all like, drat, this stinks. Here's some more of the research findings. Sorry, stereotype threat hurts performance among African Americans, Latinos, and the poor on intellectual tasks. Among women, in math and science specifically, among the elderly in memory, That's just not fair. Among whites in athletics, it's been tested in many domains. Those are the few of them. One of the earliest evidence of this research was done started in the 1990s. Many an academic has made their research career on stereotype threat. But the earliest evidence I'm aware of on this was in Jane Elliott's classroom in 1968. How many of you are aware of her blue eyes, brown eyes experiment? Just very, very quickly, because if this is something you're interested in, it's worth, there's a million videos, and the book is called The Class Divided. The day after Martin Luther King was assassinated, there's an elementary school teacher in Iowa with the question, how do I teach my second graders what that is? How do I teach them to assimilate prejudice, hatred, to the point of murder? So she decides she's going to run an experiment with them to get them to experience being the discriminated against and the discriminator. And she does it based on their eye color. She starts with I think the brown is on top first, everybody check, because she has brown eyes. And the blue-eyed kids wear a collar, so we don't have to see their eyes, we can see them more clearly. And she builds the stereotype in the room. Those blue-eyed kids, well, they're always late, aren't they? Look at Jimmy right here. Can't even get his pencil straight to get his work done. That's just like a blue eye. You know how they are, right? We're really pouring it on these kids. And then they go about their regular day. The blue-eyed kids who are in the down group have to stay a little before they can go to recess. They get penalized a little bit. But look where they go about their day. It's time for the reading task, where she's timing them on flashcards. The blue-eyed group, this is eye color. This is not about reading ability, right? The blue-eyed group does much worse than the brown-eyed group. The brown-eyed group excels at the reading task. It's their best time ever. Fights break out. Kids coming in from playground crying, "He called me blue eyes." Right? They're feeling it. So the next day, she switches it. The kids are pretty, resilient, so the switch isn't that hard on them. And the brown-eyed kids wear the collars, and the blue-eyed kids are on top. And she goes through the same thing to perpetuate the stereotype. And what happens in the reading task? Complete reversal. Same kids, one day later. Complete reversal. Now they're being treated poorly, and so they're demotivated, and so they don't perform well. Sure, all that could be explaining that. There's clearly some fulfillment of stereotype going on there. Some, I have that color eyes, and I know how they are, and I'm afraid I'm not going to do well on this reading test, and it's going to show them that they were right, and I'm anxious, and I'm worried, and kerplunk goes the reading score. It's a very interesting story to watch. For decades, Jane Elliott has been now doing this work with adults, replicated it in every population you can think of if you're feeling skeptical that it's second graders. What's the good news about stereotype threat? This one, we can correct, we can attack, simply by challenging the stereotype. Yes, you're an African-American person taking a math test, taking an intellectual test. But remember, you got 100% on the literature test yesterday, and your essay got you into this college, and you've done, right? Just giving them counter evidence and break it. We have real agency here to interrupt stereotype threat. But the onus is on us to do that. Actively engage in disrupting the stereotypes that we know so well. And they're local too. What's east side, west side, Cincinnati? What's this side of the river, that side of the river? Right? We know them. If we counter them, if we challenge them personally to the individual, we can interrupt this. And that's an opportunity. So, there they are, the big three. Implicit bias, racial anxiety, stereotype threat. Now what? First, let's talk just a little bit about how they show up in business. Unknowingly, they cause us to make choices and behave in ways that affect hiring, Right, I told you our story. I bet each of you has 10 of those. Assignments, well documented in the research. Men get higher visibility, higher opportunity assignments. At work, women get service projects, supportive roles, opportunities for promotion. What else? Where else do you see biases get in our way? Disrupt what we'd like to see happening with diversity in the workplace. It's anywhere on that employment process, from recruit to hire to promote to retain to, it surfaces all too easily. I've given you some antidotes to each of these biases, but let's talk more generally about how to blur the lines that divide us, how to decrease the otherness just a little, right? Explicit training on implicit bias. It has to happen. Because each person needs to become aware of, first needs to accept the idea that they hold implicit biases, good, bad, indifferent, wherever they are. We've got those associations in our minds, unconsciously, subconsciously. And people need to learn what their own biases are and how, if they choose to, they can counter them. Which ones do you want to change? That has to be dealt with openly, overtly. Gotta have explicit training. Have the difficult conversations. Be in contact with each other like the kids in Gordon Alport's classrooms. Work together. Help others work together. Blind hiring practices. How many are familiar with these? Kind of a new thing that's going on. It came from research on symphony orchestras, which were notoriously bad, discriminating against women. Men would get hired in way higher rates, that's scientific, way higher, than women, right? So what did they do? They put a screen in between the instrumentalist and the panel that was deciding. They just made the player invisible to the team. All they could do was hear. What happened? The number of women admitted into orchestras went through the roof. There's a company called Gas Jumpers that has implemented blind hiring practices and is now helping other firms do so. They've done some research on it. What do we mean by blind hiring? Taking away any personal characteristics on the employee's resume, LinkedIn, whatever you're using to evaluate, that signal demographic categories. Right? We heard at the very top of the talk, a black sounding name is enough to get you discriminated against. So taking away anything but skills and experience. They found that with regular hiring processes, about 20% of the people that went through to the next round of interviews came from underrepresented groups. With blind hiring practice, 50%. That's a big change. That's a meaningful change. That's a lot more people being considered in ways that they weren't previously, where they were previously excluded. Criteria for promotion, rubrics for promotion, there's a teacher word for you, that are based entirely on performance, on measurable performance outcomes. Not, well, he's got that way about him that really feels executive, or she seems a little shy. That's not helpful. That's not going to get us where we need to go. We can strip down our criteria to make them as objective as possible. And then finally, while the scales are so imbalanced, we can give a boost to those from underrepresented groups, to give them sponsors and mentors. Sponsors to advocate for them to the world, mentors to advise them privately, to help them grow. Let's give a boost to those who are suffering from these kind of unfair landscape that comes at the hands of these biases. We have an opportunity. If we can blur the lines that divide us, we can lessen the us versus them, which decreases the opportunity for biases to emerge and take hold, which then lessens the difference in outcomes for different groups. It's a tight chain. Perceive people as different, biases come into play, different outcomes. We want to look for every opportunity to disrupt that chain. So what can you do? What will you do? As leaders, we start with ourselves, right? Learn your own biases. If you Google implicit bias, you'll find that hard project, you'll find others. Whatever way works for you. Find out what automatic processing is happening for you. How many times have I said it today? Have the difficult conversations. Have the difficult interactions. When you see yourself stepping back, step forward. Step into it with all your anxiety and potential clumsiness and ask for indulgence. Actively, personally, challenge stereotypes. Right? Not, oh, it's not the case, women are bad at math. Say, you, Julie, I've seen you make change in your head. I've seen you at the grocery store tally your bill, so that's going to be under your budget. Personally challenge stereotypes. And be brave. This is hard stuff to talk about. It takes courage to step into it. But as human resources leaders, you are beautifully poised to be role models, to be leading these kind of conversations. The opportunity is there. My challenge to you today, to wrap up, is to hold this agenda along with the many priorities you're already holding. I know. But to hold this and to take action on it, to initiate. Too often we're so busy, we wait until there's a flaming injustice that calls us to action. Let's act before that. Let's lead with awareness and dialogue that can change minds. I invite you to take this conversation that we've started today back to your workplace. Continue it there as a first step towards some lasting change. We have an opportunity to be leaders on this. I hope we will. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to talk with you.